Well, first, glad to be with you, and glad we could take advantage of this amazing technology and see your comrades and friends live. Yes, I am Socialist Action's 2020 candidate for the US presidency. I have been a lifetime socialist activist in the United States. I'm on the administrative committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, which is organized periodic massive protests against US wars everywhere in the world. I am a founder of the Northern California Climate Mobilization, which organized tens of thousands of people a few years ago to protest the catastrophic damage that is being done to the climate that threatens life on Earth. I was the 2016 candidate for president. I'm a lifelong socialist activist. I'm the director of the mobilization to free Mumia Abu Jamal. And of particular interest, I'm on the newly formed National Steering Committee to defend Julian Assange and civil liberties, noting that you in the UK are witnessing the trial of Julian Assange, who is being threatened with extradition, if not life imprisonment, in the United States for his work as a journalist revealing US war crimes. I'm running against Joe Biden and Donald Trump. There's no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump is a warmongering, racist, bigot, homophobic, environmental, climate denier, anti-immigrant racist, and all the rest. Joe Biden, representing the same class, is all of the above as well. For example, in an article that we recently published in our newspaper, which is Socialist Action in the United States, we point out that in the current presidential elections, Joe Biden, the Democrat, has the support of 131 billionaires, whereas poor Donald Trump only has 99. Joe Biden oversaw the criminal justice legislation that led to the mass incarceration in the United States of the largest number and percentage of its population of any nation in history. We have 66 million people under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system in the United States, initiated by the Biden and Obama administration and Democrat President Clinton before them. A majority are people who are Black, Latinx, and Native Americans. On immigration, the Democratic Party under Obama deported 3 million people, a number that exceeded any president in the history of the United States, including President Trump. On the question of imperialist war, the Trump administration asked for a $1 trillion budget for the present year, whereas the Democrats in the House upped the amount by 40 billion, which the Trump administration readily agreed to. On every question, except the openly racist, bigot, warmongering, anti-immigrant Trump, the twin parties of the United States are the same. We do have special issues in the United States because Trump is an embarrassment to the ruling class, especially when he announces that if he feels he won the election on election day, he will declare himself the president without counting perhaps half of the vote, which are by mail in the United States. He is trying to defund the post office so ballots can't be mailed out. And he has already overseen, along with the Democrats, myriad of laws in the United States which essentially restrict the ballot to poor people, to young people, to Black people, to people of color, and so on. So there is, amazingly, open talk in the United States of a coup by the Trump administration. That is a declaration that he will ignore the election, not count the ballots beyond election day, and declare himself the president. That is an amazing event, to say the least. The Democrats' only response is to say, well, we just need a large enough, overwhelming vote that no one could challenge it. Go out there and vote Democrat. I feel a bit embarrassed by telling your audience that we face a serious possibility of a coup orchestrated by the President of the United States to disregard the elections. We are not indifferent to that. We are initiating a nationwide effort to challenge any threatened coup in the streets and issuing a call coming out of the United National Anti-War Coalition and many other groups to shut the nation down. What else could we do if this eventuality, if this threat turns into a reality? But at the same time, the broad forces involved in the US anti-war movement and every social justice movement are by far from unified in saying that Trump is a lesser, that Biden is a lesser evil to Trump. Biden comes from the tradition of the Democratic Party in the United States, which is to run a northern liberal with a southern racist bigot to so-called supposedly balance the ticket. He was Obama's right wing in the election, a northern Chicago liberal Black man running with the man who was the responsible for all kinds of racist legislation, anti-abortion legislation, and much more. So the argument in the United States among the left is, well, is fascism coming? And therefore, if it is, if we decree that Trump is a fascist, then we have to vote for the lesser evil, and that is Joe Biden. First, on the question of fascism, both parties, in our view, are the historic parties of the American ruling class. They're supported by the richest people on earth, by the major corporations, by the oil corporations, by the military-industrial complex equally. It appears that today, Trump is a bit of an embarrassment for the ruling class. He says what they do every day, but doesn't bother to disguise his racism. He wants to establish trade on his own terms with his own private friends and wing of the ruling class. The Democrats think they can do the exact same thing better and more efficiently. My campaign has taken me across the United States before the COVID-19 horror has erupted. I've been touring the East Coast. I covered 7 states there, went to the Midwest, to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, Chicago, and have been regularly touring the West Coast where I live, in California, Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, Petaluma, across the state. I've gotten significant coverage. Initially, the Atlantic magazine, very popular, warned that if you really are worried about socialism, someone who wants to nationalize the corporate wealth and put it in the hands of working people, then Jeff Mackler is the real socialist, as opposed to Bernie Sanders, who ran in the primary saying that he was for socialism and democracy, but he ran as the candidate of the ruling class Democratic Party. Sanders, as we predicted, dropped out of the race and has been an ardent supporter of Joe Biden ever since, as has the, quote, gang in Washington led by Democrat New Yorker Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All of them are for the Democrats, not just the left wing of the Democratic Party, but the entire Democratic Party, including the Southern racist bigots who are now the Democratic Party candidates the centrists, the right-wingers, the warmongers, and the anti-abortion forces. Just 2 days ago, there was a full-page ad in the New York Times signed by hundreds of Democratic Party officials, elected officials, governors, congresspeople, local officials, all of whom said that they disagree with the Democratic Party's anti-abortion platform and instead believe that the Democrats, who they are supporting, Joe Biden, have to back off and be in accord with what they say as the American people. But under the Democratic Party and the Republicans, the right to abortion has been severely restricted. All federal funds are banned from abortion under the Hyde Amendment that has been on the books for decades, with neither Democrats or Republicans amending it and eliminating it. And the famous Roe v. Wade case has been literally whittled down, so the vast number of states have barely a single abortion facility whatsoever. The rights of women have been significantly demolished. And the same with the rights of the labor movement. The percentage of American working people who are in unions in the private sector is the lowest in 100 years, similar to your country. We're down to 6%. The difference is we don't even have a reformist bourgeois labor party like you do in the United States. We have two major capitalist parties, parties of the multi-billionaires. Working people have very little opportunity to participate. For example, in 2020, when I ran for president, I filed to get on the ballot in a primary election. They said that I couldn't list my name and party, whereas the Democrats and Republicans could. I sued, and a compliant judge fined me legal fees of $220,000 just for asking that my party name be next to my own, as opposed to being listed as declined to state. American election laws are severely restricted. The left can barely get on the ballot, as opposed to perhaps 3 decades ago, when there was some modicum of access to the elections. Today, the entire spectrum of the left is barely on the ballot, with the exception of the reformist Green Party, who we collaborate with in United Front mass actions on many issues, but don't support in the electoral arena. So I don't know if my friends and comrades in England understand what's happening in the United States. We have no fascist threat in the United States. We have an insane, reactionary, backward, racist president who says what the Democratic Party does and has done for decades. They are the twin parties of capitalism. But as far as the attitudes of the American people, we have seen the most unprecedented mobilizations in US history these past 5 months. With the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, we saw between 15 and 26 million people mobilized across the United States in 2,000 plus cities in unprecedented number and strength. The majority were led by young people, Blacks including, and especially Black women. But amazingly, in the context of the COVID crisis, which has taken the lives of 200,000 Americans with 1 million infections in the United States, that is, in the United States, we are 20% of the deaths of the entire world. In that context, to see young whites and Blacks united in the street in defense of Black lives and the murder, on average, 1 Black unarmed person is murdered in the United States daily. And those are the only recorded figures. But to see Black and white youth in the streets storming the heavens in solidarity against racism was an amazing spectacle. Tragically, however, in the absence of a mass revolutionary current in that grouping, in the absence of an independent Black party, in the absence of a labor movement that has a fight back leadership. Today, we see tragically most of the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement into the Democratic Party, mobilizing to get out the votes for the racist candidate, Joe Biden. But that anger that has drove millions into the streets continues and is deeper than we've ever seen. The United States faces unprecedented crises. We have a global warming catastrophe looming, with fires in my home state literally taking 3.5 million acres, driving tens of thousands from their homes, creating conditions of air that is unbreathable and poisonous. We have a climate crisis with unprecedented power of hurricanes that floods coastal cities. We have a crisis of racism that broke out into the open in unprecedented ways. After 200 years, what was accomplished in a few days or months was unbelievable. The statues of racist Civil War heroes, in quotes, were torn down or removed from the halls of Congress. The universities that were named after racist slaveholders were renamed. The resolutions were passed calling for the abolition of the police in cities after cities. And that is in the face of literally tens of millions in the streets. The ruling class had no choice but to back off, at least in token ways. But at the same time, there has been zero defunding of the police anywhere. The police are the representatives of private property. They are the union busters. They're the former slave capture gangs. They are the former administrators of police departments that enforce Jim Crow legislation. And yet they stand unchallenged because there has yet to emerge in the United States any real powerful force to challenge them. And I must say, the left has been restricted to these Zoom type calls where we find it very difficult to get into the street. When we do, we have to wear masks and gloves and use social distancing to talk to this newly radicalized population. On the other hand, the forces of the right are minuscule. You see tiny gangs of racist bigots, often police provocateurs, breaking windows in cities in order to portray the Black Lives Matter movement as violent, whereas some 93% of all of the protests in the United States have been massive and peaceful. So we are not into this notion, this anarchist notion, forgive my phone ringing, that breaking windows is the solution today, that violence and confrontation with the ruling class is the way forward. Our view is to win the hearts and minds of the American working class, to mobilize them to defend their own interests, to build a new working class party based on democratized and fighting unions in alliance with the oppressed, and to build a mass revolutionary socialist party whose ranks are deeply embedded in every struggle of the working class. We want to become a mass party of the American proletariat and challenge capitalism for power. And thank you for having me.